Hey everyone, my name is Chloe, and today I'm here to do my first new trial of a weekly wrap-up. So this is going to be everything that I read last week from Saturday to Friday. And so I'm trying this because my wrap-ups I do them twice a month, and yet it still seems like if I'm like really reading a lot, then it's a lot of books, and I'm holding on to books from the library for a long time, and it can get long videos, it can get a little overwhelming, and I want to check in more frequently and be able to talk a little bit more about each book. And so I figured we would try it this week. Then I realized problems that happen with doing this is I'm also working on a bunch of different vlogs. So there are two books that I'm not going to be able to tell you about that I finished this week. So we're going to talk about the books that I finished that I can tell you about, because one of the ones I can't tell you about is an Advent book or a Vlogmas book, and so you'll see that in December. And then the other one is something I have for kind of a surprise video coming up. So those two I'm not going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about the middle grades that I read with my kids, and then I'll talk about, I have one YA and one adult that I read in addition to those two this week. So it's been a pretty good week. I just can't talk about a lot. So we finished The Treasure Troop, the final treasure. This series I've talked about a few different times. It's a 4-book series, and it's so cute. It's about these group of kids who aren't friends at first, but they all had this man in common, that they were all, like, one of them's a neighbor. They all know this man for different reasons. Now, this man, he was always looking for treasure. He never went anywhere without his metal detector, all the things. And now he's presumed dead because he was out looking for treasure in his boat, and the boat was overturned. They found the boat, but not the body, so he's presumed dead. He, in his will, left like treasure hunts for these kids to find different things. He left pretty much everything to these kids. And so these kids, in book 1, they're finding the first treasure, and then there's a second treasure in book 2, and then in book 3, there's a third and final treasure, and it leaves on a cliffhanger, and this is the final book. So this was really cute. I like the resolution was great. This is great for like found family and unlikely friendships, and also my kids loved like trying to solve the clues. It teaches a ton of different like puzzle systems and things. So this was really fun. Then we read Life of Fred Apples. So this is supposed to be like a math curriculum. A lot of people use this as a math curriculum. However, it suggests starting with the first one, which is this one. And this is very basic, like very pre-K. My 3-year-old could solve most of this. But it's about this little character named Fred who lives in Kansas, and it's February, and he is trying to go for a run and do different things. And Fred is a 5-year-old mathematician. He's a math teacher. And so each chapter is really fun. Like, it's telling the story of Fred, but it's also telling like geography fact, like all sorts of things. And then at the end of each chapter, it has like your turn to play. And it's 5 or 6 questions that, like I said, are very basic. And so my kids have enjoyed this not as like a math curriculum, but more as a reading book, because it's really more about Fred and his story with a couple math questions. So these are really fun. And I don't know, I'm sure it gets more intense later. We're going to keep reading them as long as they enjoy them as like storybooks. And once they get like more, heavy, we'll stop. But there's that. Then I read Letters to the Lost by Brigid Kemmerer. So this is one that was on my TBR because I did a bookshelf tour for my patrons and said, pick anything off of it. I'm going to pick the 4 most requested. And that's going to be on my June TBR. So if you want a full vlog of this, head over to Patreon. But this is about 2 people who, what are their names? Juliet and Declan. So Juliet leaves letters to her mom on her grave all the time because her mom has died about a year ago, I think. And, or maybe not quite a year. I don't know. So she writes letters to her mom. Her mom was a photographer, like a wartime photographer, and so she was gone a lot. So they wrote letters a lot when she was alive, and now Juliet just continues the trend. Well, one day she gets a response to one of the letters, and she doesn't know who it's from, but she knows it's from a boy in her high school. And the two, like at first she's like, whoa, holy violation. Like, you just read my letter to my mom, you responded, like all those things. That's not cool. But then the two start becoming friends. And he's got a lot going on in his personal life, in his family life, all of that. She's got a lot going on in her life, and the two become friends and really start the healing process for each other. It is not like we became friends and now we're perfectly healed. Not at all. The healing process begins at the very end. We're really just exploring both of their tragedies and both of their trauma in this book. And so I liked it, I guess. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars because this book doesn't really have a lot of point, and it's really short chapters, like really short. There's, 80 some odd pages in here, or chapters in here. So it's very short, and yet this was like a slog to pick up. I had so much reading time this week because my kids were in softball camps, and so I just had to be at the softball field for like hours upon hours a day, and I had a babysitter for my younger child, and so I could have read this in probably a day or two, and yet it took me almost the entire week. And the reason is because it kind of felt like tragedy porn at times, where it's like, whoa, bad thing after bad thing, and things were hyped up to like elicit emotional responses, and then like they amounted to nothing. Like the whole point was just to get an emotional response out of the characters and out of us, and I don't like that. And like I said, this book, I'm glad there's very little romance. Like the very, very end, there's maybe one scene, but it's really these two becoming friends and finding somebody to kind of commit to walking through their stuff with them. The parents in this book are horrible. There's Juliet's dad is the only person who is a decent parent, honestly. The rest are horrible. And yeah, it's heavy. It's definitely not your fun, summary YA contemporary, but there's that. So yeah, if you want a heavier book, there is some good friends. Rev specifically is a good friend in this, and he is the book that the second book is about him and his life. So that was good, but I'm not drawn enough to like pick up the next one. I might keep I'm planning to keep this on my shelf, and I'm not really sure why, because it was a 3.5. I like the end better than the beginning, but the whole process was kind of a slog. So there's that. Then the one adult that I can tell you about is called, The Anxious Generation, and it's how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. So this was a long audiobook, honestly. It was like maybe 12 hours or something, but it felt long. And the whole premise behind it is since the early 2010s, mental health issues among teenagers and tweens and stuff has drastically risen. And the author is Jonathan Haidt, and his whole argument is that it's entirely because of portable screens, so cell phones, all that kind of stuff. It's the widespread use of cell phones and the young adoption of cell phones. And I am gonna give this probably 3.5 stars because there was a lot of research and things, a lot of things that I learned, and a lot. We can all kind of instinctually say like a child and a cell phone being attached to a screen all the time is not good, but like I learned a lot in this book, honestly, and it really made sense to me. Why my generation, like those of us who were born in the 80s, 90s, late 80s, early 90s, were not impacted as much, because I didn't get a phone until I was 16, 17, something. And he talked a lot about the time of puberty and how like myelination in your brain is going so fast at that time that like things imprint really deeply during that time. And so if you are on social media and requiring social media feedback and friendships and all of that for your self-worth at that time, that's going to be really impactful. And he also talked a lot about the difference between boys and girls and how these phones and things are impacting everybody differently. Boys and girls, gender lines are somewhat drawn. I think some of it was a little far-fetched. And it also, like, he barely touched on confounding factors of, like, the lack of parental connection now that we're all on our phones all the time. Yes, so us as parents, our mental health may not be as deeply impacted because our puberty time was protected, but I guarantee our mental health is impacted and our connection with our children is impacted. And like it's just such a huge complex issue that I don't think he was oversimplifying it and thinking like this is the only problem, but he just didn't really touch on any of that. And I don't know, like at least mentioning more of the confounders, I think, and understanding that it could be other things. The other thing that I didn't love is, like, he has these big solutions, which are great. I love when people present problems and solutions. However, they felt so far-fetched to me that and his presentation was like, we've got to do this or else our youth is screwed. And the things were have completely phone-free schools, which may be doable. A lot of schools, like, he really pointed out the difference between phone free, as in phones are in a box, you put them in a box, you don't have them until the end of the day, as opposed to phone less, where you can't have them in class, but you can have them in the hallways and all that kind of stuff. So he pointed out those differences. So he says it needs to be phone free, but then we also need to completely restructure elementary school and even middle schools and have more free play, more recess, and no phones and all of that, and not any rules on the playgrounds as far as, like, adult involvement. And I just don't think that'll ever happen, honestly. And it did make me think more about how I parent, and because he was pretty hard on the helicopter parent and how we are just creating more anxiety by not giving our kids the autonomy and the confidence to go out and do things on their own. And I definitely felt convicted and like, okay, you're right. My kids are little, and so having them, go to the store by themselves or something, that's not practical. But stepping back a lot is a good thing, especially in conflict resolution, and that is something I try to do, but something I really want to prioritize is those interpersonal relationships and having them figure it out, even if it's not perfect. So yeah, there was a lot of good that I took away from this book, but it got really long-winded. It got a little hyperbolic. It got a little, like, fantastical. It got just a little arrogant at times. There's a lot to that. There's a lot of assumptions made and a lot of things. So overall, I would say, if you are already anxious about the future of our youth, don't read this book, because it's pretty doom and gloom. Honestly, it's pretty doom and gloom. And he doesn't talk much about the resiliency of kids or anything, because he also talks about how having a cell phone is so harmful to people, especially in that puberty age, but also being the only one left out of stuff is also kind of harmful. And so really you're screwed either way. So I would say, if you're already kind of anxious about this whole idea, maybe don't read it. But if it's something you're curious about, like I said, there was a lot I learned and a lot that inspired me as a mother to put down my phone more, and to give my kids more freedom and autonomy. Both of those were good takeaways. So anyway, all that to say, that is everything that I read this week, as well as a couple others that you'll see coming up soon. So yeah, that's everything. Let me know what you guys have been reading this week, what you're up to this week. I think I'm going to try to release these on Monday so I can be a little more timely. So instead of like a Friday reads, we'll make it a Monday reads. But yeah, let me know what you guys are up to this week, what you read last week, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.